Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. It was supposed to be like any other show. Another night, another crowd, another arena, full of energy, ready to see the spectacle that was WWE. But as I stood backstage, waiting for my cue, the air felt wrong. There was this heaviness, like the whole building was holding its breath, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as though the walls themselves were whispering something I couldn't quite hear. I rubbed the back of my neck and glanced around. The crew was busy with last-minute preparations. The stagehands were running around, and the buzz of excitement from the crowd was slowly creeping in. But I couldn't focus. Something in my gut told me to be alert. It was just a feeling, one I've had before, when you know something's about to happen, something you can't quite explain. You've seen the way the room can shift in a fraction of a second, when everything goes quiet, and you're not sure whether it's you or the world that's changed. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unease. Get it together, I told myself. Focus. The moment I stepped out from the backstage area, the coolness of the arena hit me, and the weight of the crowd's anticipation buzzed in my ears. They were waiting for the next match, and that was my cue. I walked down the dark corridor toward the ring entrance, feeling the thud of my boots on the cold concrete. The shadows were long here, the kind of shadows that stretched and twisted, making everything feel off. That's when it happened. The first flicker of the lights. At first, I thought it was just a minor glitch, nothing to worry about. It happens sometimes, right? A bulb goes out, a fuse blows. The lights dimmed for a second, then came back on. No big deal. But then they flickered again, and this time, they didn't come back. The entire arena went dark. The air shifted. Something was different. It wasn't just the lights going out. The crowd, usually buzzing with energy, grew quiet. You could hear them rustling, murmuring. Even the backstage crew seemed to pause. I stood there in the pitch-black hallway, trying to make sense of what was happening. My heartbeat began to quicken. Then, out of nowhere, the spotlight came on, blinding white, searing through the darkness. But it wasn't pointing at the ring like it was supposed to. No, it was pointed at something much worse. A corner of the arena. A dark corner where the seats had long since emptied. I don't know why, but my feet started moving toward that corner, almost as if they had a mind of their own. I felt like I had no control over my body, like I was being drawn in by some unseen force. And then, as I got closer, I saw it. A figure. It was standing there, unmoving, right in the corner where the light was focused. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. He was tall, his posture rigid, like a statue. But there was something off about him. Something wrong. I don't know why, but I knew exactly who he was supposed to be. He was wearing an old version of a wrestler's gear. Tattered, worn, like it had been left in storage for decades. His boots were scuffed, his tights ripped, and his face was covered with a mask. It was a faded, almost ghostly version of the old wrestler I had seen in vintage photos. He was so lifelike, but not. He looked like a relic, something left behind from a different time. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my chest. The crowd must have seen him too, because I could hear their collective gasp. But when I turned to look at the crew behind me, to ask what the hell was going on, they all shook their heads. They couldn't see him. The spotlight was on nothing but empty seats. There was no one there. But I saw him. I knew I saw him. I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen. Maybe it was seconds. Maybe it was minutes. But it felt like an eternity. And then, just like that, the figure vanished. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. The spotlight returned to its usual position, centered on the ring. But that feeling, the unease, the wrongness, stayed. The crowd erupted into confusion, but I was still staring at the empty corner. I couldn't shake the image of that figure standing there, watching me. It wasn't just some guy in a costume. No, this was something else. Something ancient. Something that shouldn't have been there. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, but as I made my way to the ring, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the arena. It was sudden, out of place. The temperature dropped, like someone had opened a door to the outside in the middle of winter. I wrapped my arms around myself, but I could still feel it. This unsettling cold that gnawed at my bones. That night, the match went on like any other, but I couldn't forget what I saw. Even as the lights brightened and the show went on, I kept hearing that sound, the faint rustling of something moving in the shadows. I kept glancing toward that corner, expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing. The night ended. The crowd filed out, and the crew moved on to the next show. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that arena anymore, that the figure was still there, somewhere in the shadows, watching. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I wasn't about to sound like I was losing my mind, but every time I walked through that arena after that night, the memories of that figure would come rushing back. The air would grow heavier, the shadows would seem to stretch longer, and I would feel those cold eyes on me again. And even now, whenever I find myself in that arena, the feeling creeps up on me, cold and undeniable. I feel the eyes on me just like I did that night. The eyes of someone or something that never left. And I'm not sure I want to know why. Story 2. The buzz in the locker room was like nothing else. It was the night before the big pay-per-view event, and everyone was gearing up for their match. You could feel the energy in the air, the nervousness mixed with excitement. It was the calm before the storm, the final moments before the roar of the crowd and the spotlight. The wrestlers were busy with their rituals. Some were stretching, others were checking their gear. A few were lost in their own heads, mentally preparing for the biggest night of their careers. I remember sitting on the bench, tying my boots, when I overheard a conversation between two of the guys near the door. They were talking about Mike, a wrestler who had been with the company for years. Known for his intense training regimen, Mike was always the first to arrive at the gym and the last to leave. You could say he was obsessed with perfecting his craft. He was the kind of guy who spent more time in the ring than outside of it, always pushing himself to his limits. If there was one guy who wouldn't miss a major event, it was Mike. But that night, Mike was nowhere to be found. It was strange. The locker room doors had opened and closed countless times, but he never walked through. The staff was starting to notice too. The minutes turned into an hour, and still no sign of Mike. I remember feeling that small, almost imperceptible twinge of unease in the back of my mind. Something didn't feel right. "Has anyone seen Mike?" one of the staff members asked as he rushed through the door, his eyes wide, his voice rising with a panic that didn't belong in the pre-show call. We all looked up, glancing at each other, unsure of what to say. "I saw him earlier," said one of the guys. "He was just here, getting his gear ready. Probably went for a walk or something, but there was no sign of him anywhere. No one had seen him leave, and there was no way he could have slipped past everyone unnoticed." We all stood up, started searching. His gym bag was still on the bench, untouched. His clothes, neatly folded, hung on the hook just where he'd left them. There was no indication that he'd left. He hadn't packed up his things, hadn't said goodbye, hadn't told anyone where he was going. We searched the halls, the bathrooms, and even the corridors backstage, but Mike was nowhere to be found. It was as though the earth had swallowed him whole. The atmosphere had changed. A heaviness settled over the locker room, an eerie, oppressive silence that hadn't been there before. We all tried to laugh it off, to chalk it up to pre-show nerves, but deep down, I think we all felt something. Something was terribly wrong. The show went on. The matches went down as scheduled. But the thought of Mike's disappearance gnawed at me, tugging at the edges of my mind. Every time I glanced at the ring, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, like there was a hole, a space, that was meant to be filled but wasn't. After the show ended, I was back in my hotel room, trying to unwind, but the images of that night kept flashing in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about Mike. Where could he have gone? How could he have disappeared like that? I tried to push it out of my head, but a week later, I found myself staring at the TV screen, the volume down low. I was rewatching some of the old footage from the previous event, just to kill time. As I skimmed through the match highlights, something caught my eye. In the background, just past the entrance ramp, there was a figure, a shadow, standing there so perfectly still, almost too still. I froze. At first, I thought it was just a glitch in the camera, maybe a shadow or a trick of the lighting. But then I saw it again, clearer this time. The figure moved just slightly, like it was shifting, and I realized who it was. It was Mike. There he was, standing in the background, just off to the side of the entrance ramp, looking directly into the camera. He was wearing his usual ring gear, a black hoodie pulled up over his head, his face half shadowed. But the most disturbing part? No one knew how he'd gotten there. No one could explain why he was in the footage. There was no record of him ever being part of that night's event. He wasn't scheduled to appear, hadn't been on the roster for the show, and wasn't listed as a guest or special appearance. No one had seen him arrive, and yet there he was, standing perfectly still in plain view, just watching. I went back to the footage, fast-forwarding and rewinding, trying to make sense of it. But it was clear. Mike had been there. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How could he have been there if no one had seen him? I called a few of the other wrestlers, trying to find out if anyone had seen him after the event. But no one had. It was as if Mike had vanished from the world entirely. No one knew where he had gone, or even if he had ever truly left. A few days passed, and I didn't hear anything more about Mike's disappearance. The company swept it under the rug, as they tend to do with things they can't explain. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen on that footage. The more I thought about it, the more it began to haunt me. The question kept nagging at me. Where did Mike go? To this day, no one knows the answer. Mike never came back. There was no official statement, no explanation. He simply disappeared. The footage is still out there, though, and every now and then I'll find myself watching it again. And every time, without fail, I catch a glimpse of him. Mike, standing in the background, watching, waiting, and I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, somewhere, waiting for his moment to return. Because there's one thing I know for sure, the camera never lies. And Mike was there. Story 3. The thing about the wrestling business is that after the lights go down and the cheers fade into the silence of the night, the place feels different. You get used to the energy, the roar of the crowd, the pounding music, the rush of adrenaline coursing through your veins. But when it's all gone, when the arena is empty, and you're just another guy walking down the hallway with nothing but the echo of your footsteps for company, it starts to feel hollow, almost wrong. Even that night, I was walking back to my locker room, the only sound the squeak of my boots on the polished floors. The staff was finishing up, tidying up the mess after the show. It was late, the kind of late where only the hardcore workers and the stragglers remain, waiting for their chance to get out and leave the world of wrestling behind for the night. I didn't think much of it. Another show, another day. But as I turned the corner near the locker rooms, that's when I heard it. It started soft, so soft that I thought maybe I was just hearing things. A whisper, a faint breath on the air, like someone calling my name. But it wasn't my name. It sounded like, "Help me, please." I froze in my tracks. The hallway was empty. There was no one around. The staff was on the other side of the building, and the wrestlers were probably already in their cars, heading home. I should have just shrugged it off, walked past, and gone back to my room. But curiosity has always been a powerful thing. It can make you do stupid stuff. I started walking toward the dressing room. The voice grew louder, clearer with every step I took. "Help me, please." It was a deep voice, not the kind you'd expect to hear from any of the crew. Not a wrestler, either. It was rough, strained, full of sorrow, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. It sounded like a man who had been crying for a long time, and there was something desperate about it, like it was coming from somewhere deep, somewhere trapped. I reached the door to the locker room. The whisper stopped, just like that. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to see someone sitting there, maybe an overworked staff member or a prankster. But there was no one. The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows across the room, but it was mostly dark. The lockers loomed like silent sentinels, their metal faces cold and indifferent. But the temperature, it was freezing. You know how when you open the door to a freezer and that sharp cold hits you? It was like that, but worse. The cold wasn't just in the air. It was in my bones, sinking into my skin, making my teeth clatter. The lights were on, still buzzing faintly, but they didn't seem to do much against the cold. The heat from the overhead bulbs barely made a dent. And that's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a movement. Something or someone shifted in the mirror across the room. Just a blur. Nothing clear, nothing distinct, but enough to make me jump. I spun around, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The air around me felt thick, like there was something there, something watching. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. For a second, I thought I was losing my mind, that maybe, just maybe, I was imagining it. but the chill was real. My breath was visible in the air, a cloud of white smoke with every exhale. I stepped forward, closer to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but something wasn't right. The mirror, it seemed off, like it was more than just glass, like there was something behind it, something waiting. Then, as quickly as it started, it was gone. The cold faded. The room felt almost normal again, but the unease lingered, crawling under my skin like 1,000 tiny insects. I slammed the door shut behind me and hurried out of there, my head spinning. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the exhaustion. But deep down, I knew I'd heard that voice, and I knew what I saw wasn't in my head. The next day, as I was getting ready for the show, I overheard the older wrestlers talking in the hallway, their voices low, like they were sharing some sort of secret. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but what I heard made my blood run cold. One of the guys, a grizzled veteran who had been with the company since the early days, was talking about the place being haunted. I had heard rumors before, of course. Every arena has its ghost stories, but this was different. He was serious. Lights flicker, he said, his voice low and grim. Doors slammed shut on their own, and the voices. He trailed off, glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might be listening. The voices? What do you mean? Another wrestler asked, clearly curious. The old man nodded, his face pale. Ever hear the voice of someone trapped in time? Someone who's been gone too long? You don't hear them at first, but when you do, it chills you to the bone. You know it's something not of this world. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was exactly what I had heard. The voice, the desperation, the sorrow. The old guy continued, talking about a wrestler from the 80s who died in a car crash. Some kind of tragedy that left the company in mourning. He was always known for being a bit off. Some said he had a dark side. Others said he was cursed. But no one ever talked about him after the accident. It was strange how much the story matched what I had experienced the night before. Almost like it was too perfect, too real. I've walked those halls since, night after night. I hear those whispers sometimes, soft and faint, creeping around the edges of my mind. Help me, please. And when I pass the dressing room, I can't help but glance at the mirror. Every time I feel it, the cold, the unease, the feeling that something's watching me from the other side. Some nights, I can hear it more clearly now. And sometimes, it feels like I'm not alone. I know the voice is still there, somewhere deep in the walls, somewhere in the echoes of the past, still crying out for help. And no matter how many times I leave, I always know the voice will be waiting for me when I return. A part of me wonders if I'll ever truly leave, if we ever really leave.